Lord, for all the ways that you want to work in this place, Lord Father. Thank you so much for that, God. Thank you because you want, regardless of wherever we are at, Lord, you want to speak, you want to touch, you want to restore, Lord God, you want to redeem, Jesus. And we thank you for that, Lord God. And I think that's one of the most powerful themes, Lord, of tonight, Lord, that you want to redeem what has been broken, Lord, what feels like it cannot be restored. And so, Jesus, we welcome you, God. You are not someone that wants to stay far away. You are not some God just out there in the universe that's just looking at us and judging us for everything that we do. But rather, you want to get involved. You want to get intimate, God. You want to be right there for us. And so that's the kind of God that we serve, Lord. So we welcome you in this place. Would you use Rich, Lord? Would you speak to him, speak through him to us? And would you open our ears and help us understand no matter where we're coming from. So thank you, God. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. So tonight's topic is conflict, and I just wanted to get an idea if that's a relevant topic for you. I did want to mention about Urbana. Have any of you been to Urbana? Woo! That's great. Anybody been twice? Anybody been more than twice? Yes. Good to see you. Yeah, I've been 10 times. So, back when your parents were children, no, I went to Urbana in '79 as a student, and then again in '81, and then for another 8 Urbana cycles, I was staff with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship for a long time. So my last Urbana was 2006. It was a sad Urbana because I was leaving staff at the end of the next year, 2007. I work as a project manager for a technology and health-related firm right now, but when I am happiest, I am studying the Bible manuscript style, still with my colleagues, my friends that I still study the Bible with, and I am occasionally get the chance to be with college students again, and so love being with the January Jumpstart with the seniors. For those of you who aren't yet seniors, I might see you one day. I would look forward to that if I get the chance. And for the senior class, I'm really happy to be back tonight, and then looking forward to being back in a couple weeks, a double header. That's really a treat for me. So tonight the topic is conflict, and some of you have indicated it's not an irrelevant topic. I wonder if anybody has had a conflict with someone you care about, roommate, friend, family member, parent, this week. Can anybody think of, okay, well, so some of you it's very, and for those of you who didn't raise your hand, and I'm not assuming you're not being honest, we can go through a whole week without having a kind of a meaningful conflict. I mean, we let things slide or we don't notice or whatever, but probably even you have a conflict that is kind of relevant, right? It hasn't been relevant this week, but it's coming, or it kind of comes up and then pops down, or then, kind of gets squashed down, but it pops up again. And maybe a conflict with your parents, or a typical conflict with your roommate, or a sibling that just gets on you in some kind of typical way. But let me just suggest, we're going to look at a story of conflict tonight. You're in the sequence, a mini sequence on the life of David, and you looked at last week. Remember the story that you talked about last week? David and Goliath. Yeah, okay. So Leslie spoke. You got to remember that. It's a big scene in David's life. This story happens a little later in David's life, and it's maybe less well known, but it's one of my favorite stories in the Old Testament. We'll get into that in a minute, but and it's a story of real conflict, and I think it's really helpful. Conflict is an issue that I don't know if you want to have lifelong relationships. I don't know if any of you want to be married someday. Yeah, you will. Let me just say, I deal with conflict a lot. The person I have most conflict in my life, can you guess? My wife, of course, because I love her the most of all human people on the planet. As I will tell, she is my absolute favorite person. and all sorts of other little, cute names that I have for her. But because that is true, we have lots of chances for conflict. And we don't always veer into conflict, but we do have conflict. And so for tonight, I want you to think of this night is going to be useful to you. If you ever want to get married, this is like premarital training. On the other hand, if marriage isn't really on your mind, and I wouldn't fault you if it weren't, if you want to work in an environment where you have other people around you, if you're not going to just hole up in your own little cave and invent little things on your own lonesome and then ship them out yourself and never have to deal with anybody else, if you have customers or colleagues or a boss or people you're a boss of, you're going to have conflict. I just had a young woman who is one of my supervisees in my office today, and the topic, we spent an hour, was conflict with a colleague of hers. Okay? It's relevant. And let me just say, if you can nip this in the bud, if you can be an excellent conflict person, you are employer gold. Okay? So, if you're not thinking about marriage, this is still a really important topic, okay? Got it? Okay, good. So, we're going to be looking at 1 Samuel 25, and the verses will show up in a minute. But let me just give you a little bit of background. This is a few chapters later than David and Goliath. David has been, as we know, he's been anointed king of Israel, but he is not yet king. Saul, the king, knows David is kind of the contender to the throne. The ladies were singing songs about David. Saul has killed his thousands, David his 10,000s, they used to sing. Saul did not like that. Saul was threatened by David, and so he started throwing spears at David. David fled from Saul's presence. And David, as the anointed to be king, has decided it's not right for him to become king of his own making. So he's not going to kill Saul. Saul, meanwhile, is threatened by David and wants to kill David, and is always trying to find David. David is with a little band of outlaws out in the wilderness. They're kind of outlaws, but they're like Robin Hood. They're good outlaws. They're fleeing Saul, but they're not like raiding and pillaging and just creating torment. And in one place, David meets up with the flocks of a very, very wealthy man called Nabal. Nabal happens to be the translation for the word Nabal is fool. So you got to think about Nabal's parents. What were they thinking? Oh, let's just name. Oh, he just looks like a little fool. Let's call him fool. But anyway, Nabal is this very wealthy man, and he has flocks and herds. And David and his army, his band of outlaws, have kind of protected Nabal's flocks for a little while. Because though they had military might and the shepherds had just sticks, David's army didn't take sheep or threaten them in any way to try to take their wealth for their own feeding. But David sends a couple of men up to Nabal's house and said, "You might have heard how it was with your men recently when we were kind of acting as kind of guards for them for a little while. We didn't harm them, as they will, I'm sure, tell you. I know you've had a party recently. If you could just pass on a little bit of a spare, leftovers to us, a couple dozen, fig cakes or, a cluster or two of raisins or something like that. That would be really great. If you could just do that, anything would be helpful. No threat of violence, no threat of force, just to kind of, we scratched your back. Could you scratch ours? It's only fair." Nabal not only turns them away empty, he kind of, he flips David off. He just tells him, who are you? Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? I don't know. Of course, David is massively famous. But Nabal acts as if he's never heard of him. And he just, I can't be giving my table scraps to just anybody who comes. Where would the world be if that happened? Well, the men go back to David and report what he says to them. And David says, "Every man strap on a sword. We're going to wipe these guys out." And he basically threatens to kill every male, Nabal any sons he has, and any men who are working in his house. That's where we pick up the story. So you can see there is a bit of conflict brewing. And so I'm gonna read this, and I'm gonna ask you to give me, what are some of the things that you like about Abigail? She's the hero of this story. David is not, sadly, the hero, as you will see. But what are the things you like about her? And I'll give you a chance to speak up in just a minute. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to salute our master, and he shouted insults at them. Yet the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm. We never missed anything when we were in the fields, as long as we were with them. They were a wall to us, both by night and by day, all the while we were with them, keeping the sheep. Now therefore know this, and consider what you should do, for evil has been decided against our master and against all his house. He is so ill-natured that no one can speak to him. Then Abigail hurried and took 200 loaves, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep ready dressed, 5 measures of parched grain, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs. She loaded them on donkeys and said to her young men, "Go on ahead of me, I'm coming after you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. As she rode on the donkey and came down under the cover of the mountain, David and his men came down on the donkey, down toward her, and she met them. Now David had said, "Surely it was in vain that I protected all this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him. But he has returned me evil for good. God do so to David and more also, if by morning I leave so much as 1 male of all who belong to him." When Abigail saw David, she hurried and alighted from the donkey and fell down before David on her face, bowing to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "Upon me alone, my lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears, and hear the words of your servant. My lord, do not take seriously this ill-natured fellow, Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my lord, whom you sent. Now then, my lord, as the Lord lives and as you yourself live, since the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from taking vengeance of your own hand, now let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my lord be like Nabal. And now to this present that your servant has brought to my lord be given to the young men who follow my lord. Please forgive this trespass of your servant, for the Lord will certainly make my lord a sure house, because my lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil shall not be found in you as long as you live. If anyone should rise up to pursue you and seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living under the care of the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. When the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for having saved himself. And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant." David said to Abigail, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you to meet me today. Blessed be your good sense, and blessed be you who have kept me today from blood guilt and from avenging myself by my own hand. For as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning there would not have been left to Nabal so much as 1 male." Then David received from her hand what she had brought him. He said to her, "Go up to your house in peace. See, I have heeded your voice, and I have granted your petition." Now, I'm going to tell you just briefly what I like about this story, not specifically about Abigail, but just about the story in general, and then I want to hear from you some of the things that you like specifically about the choices she made or the things that she did. But one of the things I like about this story is it's so unusual. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm a Christian, as you can imagine. I'm a believer. And I believe the Bible is true.
Amen.
I accept it. It's the divine word of God. On the other hand, and so that's great. I'm not assuming everybody in here comes to the Bible and gives it the same authority I do. So some of you may be, in this room, you like these people, you like the songs, you like the worship. You're checking out this stuff about Jesus or about God and about this. And for you, this story is an interesting story. I want to tell you why it's really interesting. Why it's, in fact, almost unbelievable. If you, for example, didn't believe this were the Bible or this were the Word of God, you'd have a hard time figuring out how this story comes to exist. Because, excuse me, 3,000 years ago, when this story was, the story took place, and probably 2,700 years ago at the latest, maybe even closer to 3,000 years ago, when this story was written down the first time, there were no modern conceptions of, characters with narrative and plot and stuff like that. There were histories of great men. I mean the lack of gender, specifically histories of great men, right? The stories of what kings did, who they conquered, who they beat, and everything else. There weren't very many stories of ordinary people. Now, David was one such great man. He was going to become the iconic king of Israel, right? He's not yet king, but he's going to become king. He's going to be the king of all time, of whom the Messiah is said he's the son of David. Right? That's what Jesus was known as, the son of David, right? He was the iconic great king of the Old Testament. You have Moses the lawgiver, and Elijah the great prophet, and you have David the great king. He's not yet king, but he's going to be. The idea that this story, if it were written down by a bunch of people who wanted to support the kingship, wanted to show their loyalty to the nation of Israel, this fledgling band and its Yahwist religion, the idea that they would create a story that makes David the bad guy and Abigail, this unfamous woman, the hero, the wise counselor who prevents David from committing a massacre. That doesn't exist, right? There's no, this story takes place around the same time as the Odyssey, the Iliad. These are stories of great heroes. You don't have women playing this kind of a role. This is a modern story written 3,000 years ago. The hero is a woman. I view this as what you see. There's places in Scripture that I call self-authenticating. Just the fact that it exists. You don't have to give it credibility on the surface, but that it exists in Scripture, attested by millennia. How does it exist? Well, the simplest answer is it exists because it happened this way. And people tried to narrate it in a way that didn't make David look like the giant. He certainly wasn't. Or, the evil, like Saul, who was the king, looked like a prince. Just a totally honest guy. No, they both had flaws. And Abigail, who doesn't really figure in the story very prominently after this, she's the hero. So that's one of the things I like about this story. I just think it's a very winsome, powerful, affecting story. Now, I'd love to hear from you. If a few of you just shout out things that you like about Abigail in this story. As we're just all participating in the worship just a moment. Go ahead, just shout it out.
She acted on wisdom.
She acted out wisdom. Good. And we see that in a number of ways, and we're going to draw our attention, but what's one specific thing that you most appreciated about her, Yeah.
Oh, I expect to get this one. Okay. She acted as a mediator.
She did. She didn't have to, right? Right? I mean, the men are being threatened. She's not a man. She could take, her little, just kind of stand off to the side. Obviously, she loves some of the people being threatened. Who knows, perhaps her son or sons were a part of the party that were being threatened. She doesn't have great esteem, it seems, for her husband. But she charged in instead of walking away or instead of standing back. She acted as a mediator. Good. What else? Yeah, go ahead. Just shout it out.
She was willing to take the blame. She appealed to David and called him her Lord.
She was willing to take the blame. Did you notice that? Upon me. Now, if you were to draw a pie chart, if we were to draw a pie chart and say, okay, 100% of the blame, there's 3 people, there's Nabal, there's David, and there's Abigail. How much of that pie would you give to Abigail? None. Okay, what does she say? What was her fault?
That she didn't hear about it before they went.
Yeah. She said, I didn't see the men. That was on me. Oh, as the lady of the house. I mean, she's obviously not like a housewife that, just does the dishes, right? This is the lady of the manor. She's used to commanding donkeys. I mean, she's used to commanding servants who command donkeys, right? Right? I mean, she is like a general. She has troops. She has resources. She has massive wealth, 5 dressed lambs, and she is decisive. She can deploy her troops and her resources without checking on anybody else. Right? So she is not a little kind of, shrinking behind the scenes, seen but not heard kind of person. She is a commander. And she says, men came to the house. I was distracted. I was out back. I was not paying attention. I didn't see them. That's on me. I blame myself. On me be the guilt. Take that, all those spears, all those swords that you have in your hands, and point them here. On me. Do you see that? That's amazing! Are you guys astounded? Doesn't this, when we were growing up, my daughter, we had a book that we liked to read to my daughter. It was kind of hero women, like princess pirates and things like that. Hero women, stories of, from all these different cultures, heroic women. This would be one of those stories. This is a woman who instead of, there is an army, literally an army coming toward her house. Instead of going out the back door or hiding in the cellar or trying to gather her weak ones to her in cowering in fear, she walks toward the army and says, all those swords, point them at me. On me be the guilt. And I just think it's amazing. Yeah. And so this would be a good movie. This would be like a modern, excellent story. And the thing that I love about it is, I would say, realistically, yes, between Nabal and David, that's where 98% of the guilt is. Right? Nabal, it was totally insulting. David, on the other hand, could have brushed it off. Why didn't he? Well, the thing you need to know about David, as the story opens, as 1 Samuel 25 opens, Samuel has just died. Samuel is the guy who mentored David, who literally anointed him as king, was kind of his sponsor took him from being the youngest child of a nothing family in Judea, in Jerusalem, in Bethlehem, and raised him up to be Prince of Israel and in the king's court and soon to be king. Samuel did that, and Samuel just died. He knows he's going to be king, but he also knows he can't take matters into his own hands. Samuel was the guy who was kind of rooting for him, but Samuel has died and he's still not king. Saul is still trying to kill him. And then, to top it off, he's been being a good guy with his band of men, and people are not giving him any honor, and just, he is feeling completely abandoned. And so, of course, when he doesn't have the wherewithal in him to when Nabal insults him, to just slough it off, just let it go. But he threatens murder, threatens massacre. Completely unjust, over the top, out of proportion. And it's Abigail and her words and her strategies that make the difference. Now, what I want to do in the last few minutes, we have some handouts. I want to send them around. And I want to just outline for you a few of the different specific choices she makes, things she does, that could be a model for us in terms of dealing with conflict. Most of us don't deal with life and death conflict. Most of us don't actually get a chance to face down an army with swords or bullets and guns, coming our way. Most of us won't get that chance. Won't get the chance to show the kind of courage that Abigail shows. But many of us will have conflicts. It's a very real possibility that we will have conflicts that will impact our lives in the same way, that can have long-term impact. And so I want us to learn from Abigail and to benefit from her model. And so I've got a model here that both will walk through the kind of the steps she makes, as well as give you just a reflection guide to think about your own conflicts, the conflicts that I asked you to think about at the beginning. I'm sorry, they're not quite enough. Maybe a few people could share. I guess we're close, but there's just a few. We're a few shy of the whole. That's great that there are that many people in the room. So let me just go through this. And if you have a pen, you might want to write these down. If you don't, you can just remember them as we go. I left them blank because I want you to stay with me and not read the whole sheet, because now that you have it in front of you, you're going to read the sheet. I know that you will. But I want you to stay with me, so write the things down that I tell you to fill in the little blanks, and then it'll make more sense. What did Abigail do to resolve the conflict? The first thing that she did was she committed to peace. Commit to peace. In other words, she was a person of peace. The servant that comes to her says, nobody can say anything to Nabal. Nabal is creating conflict wherever he goes. But you're the person that can pursue peace. She was a person who, in other words, when the conflict came to her, she didn't think, I wonder if this is something I should deal with. She didn't decide to pray about it and think, ponder it, maybe nurse it for a while. She acted when she knew, before she knew there was a conflict, she didn't know. But when she knew, she was committed to do something. And secondly, Also, act immediately. Abigail, snapped into action when she heard that there was an army coming. She knew that she didn't have any time to waste. She didn't start thinking about kind of getting out of town or making alternate plans. She did the one thing that she could, was to walk into the trouble. How many of you know yourself to be kind of conflict avoidant? I'm not assuming everybody. I'm kind of conflict-philic. Does anybody kind of like conflict? Yeah, excellent, yeah, I can see that. I think there's a lot of benefit. I like conflict. I often have really good relationships with people that I have a good conflict with. It strengthens my relationship afterward. Now, I'm not saying I love being in conflict. I don't. But, instead of steering away from it, I kind of steer toward it. Not because I'm courageous like Abigail, just because, partly it's perverse. I'm not saying there's anything godly about me liking conflict. I think conflict avoidant people can also learn from Abigail. But obviously Abigail was committed to do something. She didn't decide this is something she can, let pass or maybe let somebody else deal with. She walked right into it. Thirdly, seek an advocate. She didn't just send a guy to try to make peace with David. That wasn't her whole strategy. But she did send a guy or a team of people with the gift, and we'll talk about that. But she sent somebody ahead. Sometimes there's a person in our life who is a kind of a partaker in the conflict who isn't necessarily the principal, right? It's me and my roommate, me and my wife, or me and my daughter. That's a real conflict. My daughter is your age. She's 23. She's just got married. My son is 25 and he's getting married in 2 months. So this is a big year for me. I have conflict with my daughter. She's, short of my wife, she's precious in my eyes beyond compare. But we also are, because we're so alike, actually, in some ways. My wife often is my advocate with my daughter, and vice versa. She will come to me, and vice versa, because she has a stake in the outcome, but she's not a party. She's not a partisan to the side, right? Rooting for me over my daughter, or for my daughter over me, but she has a stake in the relationship itself. Seek an advocate. Even just someone to pray for you, or pray with the two of you, or just to be in the room when the conflict is happening. Right? Abigail did that. Now, she obviously has the wherewithal to kind of face down those swords and spears, but she also sends someone ahead. Fourthly, confess first. And this is amazing. Abigail finds the 2% of the conflict that's on her, and she confesses as if it's 100% her fault. She does not wait for David to say, okay, she doesn't come to him and say, look, the way I see it, 60% on you, 38% on my low-down, good-for-nothing husband, and 2%, yeah, I gotta admit, 2% on me. But 60% on you and David, I'm looking at you, Buster. She doesn't start that way. She says, on me be the guilt. Those swords, they are aimed right here. I'm the one. Because this is what I did. And I'll tell you, this is the $100 insight. This is the $64,000 insight in this passage, which is just, and I use this every time I'm in conflict. I am not great. I'll tell you, I am not great at acknowledging my problems when I am first confronted. I am just terrible at that. Because, I don't know, there's something about me, I just think, it's like when I was in college, I used to walk out of tests thinking, I wrote down the answer sheet. My professor is going to just stand back and be amazed. Wow, that's better than I could have said. That's just, that's not technically always true, but I just don't tend to have self-doubt. Self-doubt is not my big thing, or at least I mean, maybe it is now that I'm in my late 50s. Self-doubt has kind of overtaken me. But certainly in my younger days, self-doubt was not a big deal. So when my wife and I are in conflict, or my daughter and I, or other people in my life are in conflict, I assume the problem is over there. But because I've taught this passage, I'll tell you, and my wife knows I've taught this passage. You know, I will try to find the thing that I can say, that I can genuinely say, is something I did to contribute to this conflict. And that opens it up. And happily, my wife, who has gone through this passage as well, does the same thing. And so our conflicts don't explode because they're wars of words that kind of heaped on, and defensiveness. And, you know, because the thing she eventually says is, you know, David, because you don't want to be the kind of guy that saved yourself. Right? She isn't the kind of person that saved herself. She had every reason to defend her almost, you know, her minuscule slight here of David. Yeah, sure, I mean, yeah, 2% on me, but come on, you guys, what are you doing? Men, you know, she could easily have taken that line, but she didn't. She took it on herself. Confess first. Make amends. Obviously, she sends the gift. David was asking for scraps, the equivalent of a fraction of what he gets in the gift that she brings. She found a way to more than make it up to him. Sixthly, and as important as confessing first, speak truth in hope. So she does speak truth to David. I mean, she basically says, you are so lucky you have me. Because think what would have happened if I hadn't stopped you. Now, she's still speaking. She doesn't know, in fact, for a fact, that she has stopped David. He might go on to say, get out of my way, lady. She doesn't know that she's stopped him, but she's speaking in faith, words of hope, speaking truth in hope about David's future. She's not just looking to the eventual day or the potential day when he is king. She's looking to the day when he's king, looking back on this day, and being so glad, and he's being so glad that he didn't this day commit a massacre. You are so lucky you won't have this massacre that you are intending in your heart right now on your conscience as you become king. Do you see that? I mean, that's an amazing mental agility that she's using. She's not just seeing David as potential king, not just shaming him. Boy, what would happen if you became king? She is talking as if he is going to become king, because that's the promise. The Lord's going to do it. And the Lord would not want him to become king with this massacre on his conscience. She's looking out for him. I mean, she's basically saying, look, kill me and mine, that's fine, but you wouldn't want to have that on your conscience. I'm just thinking of you. But she's not saying that ironically. It's an amazing act of faith. Does that make sense? What would it be like, as we're in conflict with people, to speak with this kind of faith for that person, wanting the best for them, in fact, wanting them to be better than the best that they already are, by seeing, and again, I use this all the time with my wife. I don't want this to be the end. I am proud. I have words. I have justifications. I have all sorts of arguments that bolster my rightness. But At the end of the day, I want to sleep in the same bed. At the end of the week, I want to still be married to this woman. At the end of my life, I want her to die in my arms. That's what we've agreed is the way she wants to die, in my arms. And, she'll go first. I think that's the least I can do. A long time from now, not because I've, had anything to do with making that happen, but because I'm there at the end for her. That's my vision. But in other words, that vision of my life comes into play as I realize I've got to humble myself right now because I care about this relationship tomorrow. Not just about my pride right now. I was talking to a woman today. She's in my office. We spent an hour. The topic was conflict. Two colleagues that I supervise, both of them, they're having conflict with each other. They are very different people. And I said to the one who was in my office, I said, I don't know if it's going to work out, but I do know if it does work out, it will help you. It'll be better for you if it works out. If you can somehow make this work, I would say the same to the other. I was speaking to the person I thought probably had less percentage guilt. But there's no zero, it's not 100% guilt. Both are implicated. But I'm speaking to her, if one of them has to leave, it will be a less good situation than if they both can actually stay and it can work out. And I'm just speaking with faith about where this person could be in 3 months' time, where this relationship could be, where they could both be on the same team. And a stronger team because they have worked it out. And then finally, trust God. At one point, Abigail had to stop speaking. She said all she could. She'd done everything she could, and she had to leave it to God. Others' hearts are in God's hands.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Now, I encourage you, if you had a conflict in mind as we started, or if you have a conflict that's a typical conflict, I want you to just take a couple of minutes. We're going to move on in the service in just a couple of minutes, but I want to give you a couple of minutes just in the, as was said earlier, God is still here, He's still at work, and there may be some really important work that happens because you prepare yourself for a kind of a reconciliation, a conflict that you would like to kind of press forward, not veer away from, not try to hide from, but press into. In faith, in confidence in God and His work, even in the midst of this murky or, difficult situation. So take 2 minutes, and I'll pray for you, and then we'll move on. And the worship team could come back in just a couple minutes. So Lord, I do pray for each of us and the typical conflicts that we face, or the specifically painful or present conflict in our lives right now. I pray that you would, we know that your heart is for reconciliation. Your heart is for peace. Your heart is for laying down the weapons of war, laying down the verbal arguments that we would want to win, the defenses that come to us, that we want to beat people with our arguments or our perceptions or our perspectives or our opinions. Help us to be able to use our words and our resources, our time and our love to build peace, to strengthen relationships for a lifetime, to build teams in work settings and ministry settings and academic contexts that are mutually blessing and not competitive and destructive. And give us confidence that you can work even when we put ourselves at risk, when we head into the battle, disarmed and accepting responsibility for the small fraction of the conflict that's truly ours. Thank you for the blessing you wrought in David's life this day, in this story, and the blessing you bring in our own lives as we're willing to follow Abigail's heroic example.